Hello and welcome to this episode of the Sticky Note Marketing Show. I am your host, Mary Zarnecki. So get your sticky notes ready because I cannot wait to introduce you to our special guest expert today. Andrew Fritts is the CEO of Augment, and he is going to be sharing us what is happening on the cutting edge of AI in sales and some other areas of your business that you may not have thought of as sales before, but after today's episode, I'm pretty sure you will. So, welcome to the show, Andrew. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thrilled to be here with you.
I know that there are going to be people tuning in, watching this, listening to this who already know you and are thrilled to be listening to you. But for those people who are meeting you for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about your role, what Augment does, and what problem you solve?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you for having me today. Very excited to talk to you and your audience. Yeah, so I'm an old-time sales guy. I've spent my entire career selling large deals to large companies. That's been my path all the way through from the first job I had out of college. What do you do with an English major out of college? You get a job selling if you want to make rent in San Francisco. That's what I did. Found my way over to a company doing demand generation webinars called On24. Great place, worked there for a lot of years. And then from there, made a pivot that turned out to be really important, a great fork in the road for me, to a company called N3, where we did outsourced sales as a service. And that was the springboard for a lot of what I'll talk about today. I didn't even know this existed as a discipline before the N3 recruiters came calling. I was in the business of filling funnels for CMOs at IBM and Oracle and SAP and everybody. And I kept getting the same question from them. This is great. All these top funnel leads are wonderful, but when is something going to come out the bottom so the sales guys will get off my back? The traditional he said, she said of marketing, if you will. And the N3 guys had this novel approach to this, which was they weren't just going to do SDRs for hire or meeting booking or something like that. They were going to put outcomes on the line and make the invoice depending on whether they could generate top of funnel, top line revenue, or net renewal rates from existing customers. And I thought that was amazing. I didn't even know that existed. And I took a risk on it, showed up over there, ended up running their new logo acquisition business, which went well right from the start. We added 30 logos in 2 years, and that was a great explosive time. And then we were bought by Accenture. Accenture put us in as the crown jewel of their sales operations practice, which when we got bought, we were 2,000 people. When I left last July, we were about 15,000 people. So the growth was explosive at Accenture, and we had a lot of great times there. But one thing that troubled us all the way through was we were seeing a bunch of different changes in the marketplace. I think we'll talk about some of them today. And we felt that the sales and marketing tech stack that was out there was doing a solid job of getting emails out faster and with better punctuation, and a pretty good job of forecasting, especially from a big data top-down model standpoint, but not as good a job as it probably could have done getting to know the customers themselves, finding out what moved them and what was moving decisions behind their walls. And that, it turns out, is more important than ever, especially in today's world, because even though it's much faster to get marketing outreach emails out than it used to be, it's much slower to get decisions made than it ever was before. And there's reasons for that, I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah.
But I am here at Augment building the world's first relationship operating system, which is a piece of AI technology we've built to be used not just by the sellers, but also by the customer champions and their stakeholders as well. So we're building a system that will accelerate the decision-making journey and create more durable relationships, which we think should be the goal for everybody.
I cannot wait to dig into a few of those things. But I think one of the things that you brought up that I want to pull on first, the
Yeah.
thread around speed, right? So there are a couple places that historically marketing and sales gets frustrated about, like the speed to create content. Like you said, it's easier now to get some of the assets out the door, like get the content created. But I think there's still been a lot of frustration, at least I come from historically the marketing side of things. I know that there's always that tension between marketing and sales, like you said, who's he said, she said. But if the content's coming out faster, the challenge is still, but do we have the right intelligence so that the content is the right content?
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about what you're hearing as some of those frustrations and how you're tackling it.
Yeah, and I think this is an exciting moment in that particular space. And I'm not sure we've all fully realized where we are in this moment, but I think we should. And what excites me is this. B2C figured this out long ago, right? B2C has very specific intelligence on who each of us are. I have got a closet full of sweaters that Instagram recommended to me before I even asked them for a new sweater. And they do a great job with my taste before I say anything at all. They know who I am, what my buying preferences are, so on and so forth. And I don't think that the same transition has ever really occurred in B2B. I think B2B has gone out of its way to learn about the accounts. That was a good start. We're going to do account-based marketing. We're going to understand how IBM buys versus how Microsoft buys versus how Google buys. And we could talk about that for three more podcasts because I've worked for all those companies. But that's only one piece of it. Then the next piece down is persona-based marketing, which also very interesting. How does a person who's typically in this role buy for this type of a service? What I think is really exciting is I think we can go beyond both of those previous versions and generations to a new place where we actually can market to the individual now. If we're paying attention to the customer intelligence from a first party data perspective and even go beyond their LinkedIn profiles to what they say in meetings, how they comport themselves in the decision making process, we have a shot at personalizing the content to a place where it is specifically designed not just for them, but for the other people that they may encounter within their companies. And that I think is a really exciting place to be and gives us a chance to assist the actual most important salesperson in a deal, which is the customer champion, not the seller at the supplier. So from that angle, I think it's really exciting, but I don't know that we've all fully understood the power of it as of yet. We're very enamored so far with the notion that whereas before I could have sent 10 emails before 8 a.m., now I can send 10,000. And they do, in some cases, look a little bit individual. But whether they've taken into account the greater context associated with previous interactions, buying patterns, and so on and so forth, and who the person actually is as a person, how they like their content, what format they like it in, those are things I think that you could still see a lot of room for improvement on. And that's where we're headed.
And I think that's one thing that my first person perspective, having worked with you at N3 and Accenture,
Yeah.
I was always very impressed the way that you led with that consultative sales approach. I don't know if that's the term that you would use, but the idea
Yeah.
of, okay, let's just not put what we want to say out there. Who are we actually presenting to this to? Let's think about
Yes.
the story. Let's think about what we're crafting. What's in it for them? What's really a win for them? Who do they need to look good to? That it's not just a B2B sale. It's this is a human, right? That has needs and they have to look good to their own boss and they have their own goals and objectives that they're trying to reach.
Yeah.
Like, how do we actually come from that perspective as opposed to let's just dump a whole bunch more information and a whole bunch more data and a whole bunch more white papers about how awesome we are.
Yeah.
So I always thought that was really interesting. And I know that's something that you've brought now to what you're really creating and
Yeah.
weaving into what you're doing at Augment. And you did post recently, at the time of this recording, something on LinkedIn that really posted, like, really stood out to me about that clarity, right? Being consultative, thinking about the audience first, and clarity winning over just more information. So, can you tell me a little bit more about how you're weaving that into what you're doing at Augment?
Yeah, a great origin story too. You're right. I've been very fortunate in my career to have some really interesting jobs, and as the N3 job evolved into the Accenture job, effectively my portfolio of accounts had over 15,000 people working on over 320 go-to-markets every day for some of the biggest companies in business. And that is a really incredible seat to sit in to look at how sales performance is actually impacted by things. I think people traditionally believe the best sellers are type A, the most aggressive people in the room, quick with a joke and to light up your smoke, like those types of models all the way through, silver tongued when they get the microphone in their hand, they never let it go, so on and so forth. And there certainly were a healthy number of folks like that who were at the top of the stack ranking. But I'll tell you, literally every one of them and all the ones who weren't like that, but were still at the top of the stack ranking, would be better described as being highly educated observers of their customers specifically. They were deep in the weeds on the language the customers use, the gates they were up against, the power positioning and the blueprint on the customer side of the organization. That was a religion to them, much more so than, oh, I passed this stage in the sales cycle like I was supposed to. Oh, I got pricing approval, so on and so forth. That, generally speaking, was just noise. What was really the power was what was the customer going through in that moment? How could they be of assistance to them? How could they take things off their plate? I would always tell my reps, your job is to remove as many things off your customer's list as possible in every engagement. And sometimes that's obvious things like getting them the proposal quickly. Sometimes it's they need a restaurant for a steakhouse in Cleveland. In both cases, you got to be as quick as you can be. They need to see you as someone who's there to assist them because that is your real job. I think one phrase I've been using lately, see what you think about this, but I think this is really important. Fit beats pitch. So I think it's more important to make sure that the two sides are a good fit for each other and can work hand in hand going forward than to give this great pitch and say yes to every possible thing and have them feel so great that you said yes to everything. There's a lot more value in finding the friction points early because the friction will always show up. At some point in these complex deals, the friction will show up. It's much better if you find it early. And I think the best sales reps out there focus a lot of attention on that. And I think the clarity pitch that you brought up in the LinkedIn post, the further up the chain you go, the more this becomes important. So throughout my career, the deal sizes went up time after time. On 24, we started out selling 10 or 15 grand things and moved up to 100, 200 grand. And we felt like we had done really big deals. At N3, we would start at the $1 million level and go up to 5 or 6. At Accenture, it was 100 times that. And as you went up and you were given access to larger organizations with more power and more budget, what you find again and again is the people are very busy and they need things in the way they need them at the time they need them. And if you can deliver that, you will find yourself getting more calls than perhaps you should from that person when the next question comes along. And I think that's the piece. You have to deliver things with clarity and with enough personalization that they're going to get consumed. You have to realize what is little things like what are the device preferences of the person you're talking to? Is this a person who has 3 screens and they're surrounding them in every way, like a big IMAX studio? Is this a person who works off their laptop, or is this a person who operates completely off their phone because they're putting it down between tee shots? All of these different stakeholder groups are important, and sometimes one of them is more important than another, but you have to be there to serve them and know what type of content they can consume at the right moment. What we're doing now, it's really exciting, is doing that asynchronously. But that's the first time this has been done. Historically, you try to get all this in a live meeting and hope the follow-up went well, and that was that. Nowadays, a lot of it is done asynchronously. It's really an exciting time, I think.
I agree. I think it's incredibly exciting. I love the idea of the asynchronous, and I want to come back to that in a second. But you had me writing a couple notes on my own sticky note here as you were talking, not just knowing who the person is, right? Because you talked about, okay, we went from like account-based marketing, and that was fancy and advanced in its
Yeah.
day, and then we went to persona marketing. But now you're talking about not just what do I need to say to them, but how, right? Are they on their phone? We all joke around, all us Gen Xers being like, seriously, voicemail? You want me to
No.
return a voicemail? Do I have to talk to a
Right.
human? So I think that idea of now it's not just what I have to say to them, but how am I going to get it into like really understanding their reality?
Yeah.
So I want to go back to where I wanted to head toward today, which is tell me about how you do that, maybe in the work that you're doing at Augment or
Sure.
where maybe you're not even getting to it yet, but you're like to. Where does that get helped by AI and where does that still sit with the responsibility of the human? So,
Yeah.
where is this being accelerated by AI and where does the human still have to come into that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and it's one we wrestle with literally every day. And the origin of this approach, again, is from our shared history together. You will recall part of the superpower back in the N3 days in our RFP response construct was that we never presumed that the response to the RFP was going to be enough just because the procurement person, however wonderful they might be, had asked us to provide something in call and response in Ariba. We wouldn't stop there. We would always produce alongside it a different story of our response and the win advantages for us. And in most cases, we would provide that response in 3 separate formats because there was always a chance that someone up the chain was not going to go into Ariba and instead really preferred to see things in Word because maybe they used to work at Amazon or in Excel because they used to have the job as the COO, the CFO, or in PowerPoint because they used to work at Accenture like us. And so, because of that, you had to have these 3 content flavors in order to be as widely readable or consumable as you'd like. In the AI, the post AI world, obviously, it is easier than ever to produce those same types of journeys with those same types of flavor choices. And so that's really exciting to me. We go out of our way to ask early what the preferred content type is for the customers, both in a self-service model and also in the live meetings we have with them. And that acts as their content preference going forward, essentially as the pre-existing preference for their, we call it expert language model, within our tool that springboards every piece of content for them specifically. So once we've got that and we understand exactly this is the way they best learn, we can do a great job of serving them that content at the appropriate time within the greater process plan. But it's really exciting because now, especially with the advent of AI skills, which is a big term topic in the industry right now, that greater context, going beyond RAG to this place where you've actually got the skills wired in, really gives us incredible superpower to be much smarter than we were before. Now, to the last question you asked, though, none of this still replaces the humans at the heart of the interaction. Still, it's all in service of the greater relationship between the two. Our goal is always to make these pieces certainly seem organic and intuitive, but to lift up the two people involved and to take them to a place of greater accountability to each other and greater transparency. Because in my experience, that's what really keeps a relationship steady year after year. It's not because you did some great glossy immediate first impression, first date motion. You came, you showed up, you delivered time and again. That's what keeps things durable. So I think AI's great power is in the ability to achieve that greater accountability and transparency. Because once you can actually see how the call went and realize where your glasses were rose colored and where they shouldn't have been, you can get to a place where you heard it the way the customer said it. And then you have a much better shot at delivering on what they thought they heard. So that's what's really exciting to me.
And I think that goes back to your point about the power of clarity and clarity being such a competitive advantage for the sales professionals that know how to use it
Yeah.
and know how to gather the right intelligence and manage the level and the amount of audience intelligence that you can actually gather at this point.
Yeah.
I know you've also talked about that. So I want to dig into that too, is that more information is wonderful, but you also now have to be able to manage that influx of
Yeah.
audience intelligence. So, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of how that's maybe determining who is succeeding and who's not? And
Yeah, that is the tricky thing, right? We work with a lot of different amazing providers who operate specific point solutions that are important to users of our overall system. And I am impressed daily by the things they put out. Incredible scouting reports, amazing intelligence on existing customers, amazing dynamic content generation that can build a proposal just from listening to a call. All of these things, as well as, of course, cadencing tools and the tools we used to have, when you weave them all together, you get a really immersive construct. But the reality is, it's also a lot to try and make sense of that noise. And it's getting to be more, not less. So every day, a couple new aspirants to the throne show up in each of these different areas. And if you look at real high sophisticated consulting models, they're under a lot of pressure from people springing up who used to work at their within their walls and now can build models and essentially agentic systems that replace 8-week engagements very easily with quick analysis of the right data sources. That's again amazing and really instructive. And the right type of person consuming that information knows what the right action is next. But most people don't. Most people, that's a higher level skill, that ability to filter and realize what the next step should be based on that information. That is a very tricky thing to try and find your way through. And I have not known a lot of people in my career who could do it very fluidly and quickly. And that's part of what we've set out to build is the productization of the filtering piece itself. It's less about grabbing first sources for data. We're more or less agnostic on that front. What we're interested in doing is turning the data into actions, not just for the seller, but for the customers and their stakeholders themselves. And so that ability to pick out the melody in that chaos of sound is what we're really going after. And I think when we get there, and we've already started to get there, when we get there, we will do some interesting things. One of which is, I think we may even go beyond UX as a problem at some point. That's the goal we're really chasing. And I think people for the longest time were worried about seats and licenses and usage and so on and so forth. And I get it, absolutely get it. I have managed very large teams who all had instances of, for instance, Salesforce and went into them roughly once a quarter when they had to, because if they didn't, the commission check wasn't coming. But the rest of the quarter, they didn't touch it. And I think the notion of usage was always problematic. It's gotten much more so, though, in today's world with all this tool proliferation we just talked about. I think the winning strategy in the end will likely be something that goes beyond the UX completely and delivers the next action to people where they are. And if we do a good job of that design, there's no reason why that has to stop at sellers and their managers. It can absolutely move into the customer organizations as well. And it should, because they're doing most of the selling right now.
And that brings up a my kind of next question, which is the complicated nature of the B2B sale right
Yeah.
now and the number of influencers, like you're saying, the proliferation of influencers on decisions and even just the extenuated circumstances around the decisions that are being made and how long the pipeline, how long the sales cycle might be. Can you talk a little bit about what, dig in more to that idea of it's not just about giving this tool to a salesperson, right? It now has to go into the champions, the enablers, the people who are trying to also do this job within their own organization.
Yeah, not to put too fine a point on it, every single one of us is a salesperson. Now, we don't get much press about it, right? The marketing people don't get a lot of press for being salespeople, and they get a lot more press for it than the operations people do or the developers do. But anybody who's got an idea that they want to see get approved is to some degree in the job of selling something to someone else. And there is absolutely a ton of improvement to be made in helping those people to do that. It turns out for the sellers, the piece I think that is under discussed right now is how little time they spend in rooms affecting the decision. And it's not that they don't desperately want to be there all the time. Of course they do. Of course, that's their goal. However, Gartner has put out a study suggesting that 83% of a decision-making process is run without any salesperson in the room. That leaves 17% for the salespeople to be involved in. That 17% is split up between all the reps who bid on a deal, not just the winning rep. The actual winning rep probably gets, in most cases, 7 8% of the time in the decision making process. The rest of the time, they have to hope that their champion is doing a great job for them in a bunch of rooms that they're not allowed into. So I think that there's a lot of value in unearthing what goes on in those rooms. During the days when I was managing lots and lots of reps, we're a small company right now, growing fast, but a small company at this stage. So not as many reps anymore. But I used to always ask during forecast meetings, are you on a text thread with your champion? And if they said no, then I would take the deal down by 2 stages immediately. In today's day and age, there are so many more stakeholders involved in a deal and so much more time going into decision than ever before. And the sales cycles have really lengthened. This is one of the only aspects of the B2B world that's slowed down in this age of acceleration. The sales cycle is getting longer. It is lengthier by a third than it was 5 years ago. So why is that? I think one of the reasons is that information is so much easier to gather than it ever was. The advent of natural language models allows people who wouldn't have known how to ask the question the right way before to ask the question 4 or 5 times until they get the answer they're looking for. And that means more people with more opinions on whether a decision should go one way or another than ever before. I think that's in some ways a good thing, and in other ways just really something for us to address as quickly as we can. You have to understand where the information's coming from, how they're consuming it, and do your best to skate to where the puck's going to be, which is not an easy thing. But either way, you can't escape the reality that there's no longer one decision maker in a deal. There are many, and they all have their moments, and you have to be ready to address as many of them as you can. And that is difficult if all you're worried about is, did I manage the latest step in my sales cycle? You've got to get inside the heads of your customers.
Amazing. I just have two more questions for you, if you don't mind. If you've got
Cool.
it. So, one, I know we've got folks listening to this episode who maybe at the beginning of their experience, their career in sales, marketing, and then we've also got folks that are advanced, right? The advanced level. So, if you thought about the people maybe listening to this at the beginning of their career, knowing what kind of world we're entering right now, we are living in right now,
Yeah.
if you were starting out, what would you give yourself advice or what would you give to someone maybe at the beginning of their career in sales?
Yeah, it's a fun question for me, particularly because I have two sons, and one of them interned for me last year at Augment and will be doing so again this summer, and the other one will start the summer after. And so it's near and dear to my heart how to advise the younger ones among us how to begin their career, because I've got a real interest in making sure that at least those two kids do a great job with that. Look, I think a lot has been made, like I said earlier, about this notion of jobs are going away. I think that we have to think of it instead as a time of opportunity. I think we have to look at the use of AI as a non-optional skill at this point. I have got my sons using AI for things every night of the week. We use it to plan our trips. We all engage with it and go back and forth. We use it to learn new skills. My son will argue with me for 15 minutes about the best tool to get a specific thing done. Last night we were arguing about Canvas versus Gemini to finish the Sicily itinerary that we're working on. So I think the big thing for the youngest generation is I'm definitely not in the business of advising people to go into computer science at this exact moment, but I do think if you can look at AI as a force multiplier for your own skill set to learn as much as you can, as quick as you can, and to put it, like I said earlier, into content that you can consume, because that's really important. Don't miss that part of the lesson here. Another example from my son, actually, he had a very busy testing schedule for his high school. He's at a great high school here in San Francisco, and he realized he had all this time on buses. And so what he did was he worked with AI and he built himself a podcast series. First, he built quizzes with GPT, and then he created them into a podcast series, and he listens to them back and forth on the bus to school. And I think that just happens to be the way he best consumes information. And so he built it in that way. And he could do it in minutes because of the power of this stuff. It's incredible. For people at the other end of things, I think that especially the newest evolution of AI, the advent of agentic workflows should be a very exciting thing as well. So even if you're at a place where you feel like you already learned everything you need to learn, I'm working with a lot of companies right now who are in, let's call it more traditional spaces, even manufacturing companies and so on, and their sales teams are generally more experienced in general, but they can be more resistant to tools. And that's where I think that the UX, post UX era is really important.
Yeah.
If I can take the things they've always done and then just feed them to whatever communication or consumption style they need, a better answer to their scouting report, their manager update, their follow-up email, the proposal they're writing, and they don't even need to access my interface to do it, that's a magical outcome. And it can lift anybody at any stage of their career. And the other interesting thing is in those verticals, obviously, very few other people are actually doing those things because they're operating with the old dog trick model. And so it's a really huge advantage for people who do agree to be assisted by AI at all. And that I think is really exciting.
Oh, I agree. I think it can be intimidating being more advanced in your career if you're not the AI person, right? You don't want to be known as the AI guru, but just being open to integrating this into the way that you've been operating. So that's
Yeah, I
fantastic.
think it's a really exciting time. And I think, look, it's on all of us who are directly in the space to make it seem less intimidating. I think it is challenging, right? Because there's a new thing every day. Like we were talking this morning in our dev call about the fact that 6 to 9 months ago, all we were talking about was Perplexity's Comet. Now today, all we're talking about is Claude, and last week all we were talking about was Gemini. And there's always some new flavor. And these are all amazingly powerful tools, typically with some locus of impact, and you have to know which one to use for which purpose.
No,
But the job of being the operating system or the orchestrator of those things is a really crucial piece, and that's what we're hoping to be.
amazing. I, for one, am incredibly excited about bringing more clarity to the issue and
Yeah.
helping unpack piece by piece as people are starting to get.
But we need your help. All of
So
us do.
fantastic. Thank you, Andrew, so much. I know that obviously, hopefully, everyone has very full sticky notes coming out of today, but people may have more follow-up. So we'll be including some links about how to get in touch with you with this episode. But if you were going to direct folks who have a question, who are like, oh, I like what he said about that, but I want to learn more, what's the one place that you would direct them to get in touch or to learn more about what you do?
Yeah. I am highly findable on LinkedIn. That's the easiest place for me. The only trick to me at all is that my name is spelled in the Dutch way rather than the German way. So don't come to me with your on the Fritz references. My name is spelled Fritts, not TZ. But you can find me on there. It'll say San Francisco Bay Area, Andrew Fritz, Accenture. You got me there. That's the easiest place. Augment's website is augment.co, not augment.com. We'd love to have you come look at the relationship operating system whenever you're ready. But those are the best two places to find us.
Amazing. And we'll make sure those are included wherever you're watching or listening to us. So thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing your wisdom on the podcast.
I enjoyed it. Have a great day.
Thanks. And for all of you guys listening and watching, thank you for joining us. If this was valuable to you, share it with a friend. like, subscribe so you know when our next guest is coming. If there's a guest that you want on this show, if there are questions and topics that you want covered, make sure to leave those in the comments and we will respond to all of those. So thank you, and we'll see you on the next episode.
See ya.